one guest here for today's show. That is Mr. Joe Everett from NFL Draft Bible for our NFL Weekend Review and Monday Night Football Preview. Joe, how's it going today, man?
Doing really well. It was a rough Sunday, but a great Saturday, so I'm happy that getting the college ball figured out. I just got to understand this crazy NFL, man.
Yeah, the NFL's certainly been something here this year. Lots of ups and downs. And I think a big part of that, Joe, and we can kind of touch on this a little bit here at the top of the show, is that we don't have an elite team in the NFL. I mean, Philadelphia leads the way at 8-1, best record in the NFL by a game and a half over the Patriots, also the Vikings and the Saints and the Rams. But the Eagles don't really feel like an elite team either, and we'll talk about them here in a little bit as well. I think that's part of the problem here is that a lot of people are going to call it parity. I'm going to call it inconsistency. There are a lot of teams that are just hovering in the middle of the pack right now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of teams playing just really terrible football. I don't want to say injuries are the 100% culprit, but they certainly have helped. But right now, there's not only some teams just in outright tank mode, but just looks on coaches right now. The look on Ben McAdoo's face in the press conference is priceless, and he's not the only coach that just looks dumbfounded by what they're seeing on the field, and they shouldn't be the only ones. It's, there's been some nice teams, but, there's not only a lot of middling groups, there's just some outright dumpster fires right now.
All right, well, let's look at this Monday Night Football game here, and then we'll touch on a few of those dumpster fires and also some of the teams that do look pretty good around the NFL. But game 473, 474 here, the Detroit Lions take on the Green Bay Packers this evening. Lions road chalk at Lambeau Field on Monday night. Very significant, even with Brett Hundley as the quarterback for Green Bay. Now, obviously, if Aaron Rodgers was in there, Green Bay is probably about a touchdown favorite or so in this game. But the loss of Aaron Rodgers is very, very significant. Out there across the marketplace, you've got a 1.5 at the Greek, 2 at Pinnacle, 2 at BetOnline, 2 at 5 Dimes, 2.5 at DSI and Bookmaker, 3 at Bovada. So this number is kind of all over the place based on what these individual sports books need. I understand you've got Brett Hundley as the quarterback for Green Bay, but should the Lions be a road favorite here, Joe?
I'm not totally buying it. I mean, you're looking at the Packers side of things. Green Bay's going to really benefit from that time. If any, I think we touched on it. If any team needed a bye, it was them after that Saints game. They got, I think, a lot of people healthy, really outside of Martellus Bennett. And, of course, Aaron Rodgers out, but maybe Lane Taylor, the guard. But other than that, they are full bore, especially what helps them is Bakhtiari, Bulaga, all rested up. I think we'll see a lot of Aaron Jones early. The Packers really, it's just going to be more traditional. I'm seeing more I formation, a lot more 12, 22 personnel to bang it between the hashes here from that Saints game I just watched. And, they'll get creative, a little zone read and misdirection. But like I said, a little just more traditional looks. Use Hundley's mobility and Aaron Jones' explosiveness and just stay ahead of the chains. I think we'll see a lot of Ty Montgomery and Randall Cobb too, but some good old-fashioned bootlegs, get that play action going with the running game. Some classic sprint right goes from old Mike Holmgren's playbook should be what the doctor ordered here. I think they really have to get Brett Hundley on the move, going on the run, doing what he does well, because that's where he's effective. It's just the problem I saw in the last game. He's blatant recognizing coverages. He's just not trusting his reads. There's some stuff that adjusting to what he sees, trusting those eyes, because he's an athlete. He's going to make a difference outside of the pocket, and that's where the Lions. You're going to have to be careful. They have to dedicate the spy. He's hard to catch. So I think the real intrigue here is what Mike McCarthy's going to be bringing, what he's cooked up for us. So Ezekiel Ansah's questionable. Glover Quinn is the only downside for the Packers. I mean, this guy's just turning into a great player, and that's another guy. Talk about guys who not only leaders of their defense, but has a chance, I think, to be a great coach. If he doesn't go into coaching, I'll be shocked because he seems like that type, just a lifer. But on defense, you want to watch where Glover Quinn is and what he's doing. I really think he's running the show for that whole back half. And on offense for the Lions, I think that it's Matty Stafford up against Dom Capers and his 3-4. He gives you all these fancy looks. You're going to see 1-5-5 alignments. He's got that new nitro package he's working on. But I mean, ultimately, it's a lot of the same. Dick LeBeau, there's some zone blitzes. He's going to keep Matt on his toes. It's really the health of the Lions receivers is the only issue. Kenny Galladay is doubtful, probably not going to play. Golden Tate's not on the injury report, but I'm not positive he's 100% right now. So I would think Marvin Jones, that's going to be the leader of Detroit's attack here, and I think that's the real. The Lions better have the right spikes, because I think this field at Lambeau too is good. That grass can be plenty long, or as long as they'll allow. So just to slow down what Detroit does in that spread, because the Lions don't run. They have to manufacture runs. I think if you watch Detroit, they're a whole lot like the old Colts offense, which Jim Bob Cooter comes from, but they're more setting up the run with the pass. They scheme it. They'll audible out to it in most cases, but it's not an initial read. And when that initial look's blown, Stafford, if they take a no loss on a carry, they'll consider that a small win. I mean, they're just that bad at moving the ball on the ground. So, a lot of passing by Stafford. I really think that, the Packers, I don't know, I don't necessarily agree with the line, because this is a defense, this is a team that's had prep time. Like I said, I'm just excited what McCarthy's bringing on offense. This should be a bit of a new look, and they're definitely going to throw a lot of stuff at this Lions D.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we may see a little bit of a line move here later tonight if Demarius Randall and Kevin King are able to go for Green Bay. Those are two parts in that back seven that would be really helpful, especially because, as you said, Detroit doesn't really try to run the football too much. It'd be nice if they tried to establish it a little bit more maybe, but, they are going to throw the football predominantly here with Matthew Stafford. So if Green Bay is a little bit healthier in the secondary, and that's something that we'll have to watch, the beat writers and all that on Twitter to see, then I think that's something where maybe Green Bay does get a little bit more love here. But it's interesting because we've seen teams off the bye get steamed pretty much every time here this year. Of course, we had the Rams and Giants both off the bye last week. So, the movement that we did see in that game, which was heavily one-sided on the Rams, doesn't really apply here. But, you have this Detroit team that played last week against Pittsburgh, looked very good. They only scored 15 points, but they gained a ton of yardage in that game. Primetime game. A lot of people watched it, and I think you do get a little bit of recency bias here in this number because Detroit, racked up, 420-some-odd passing yards, 500 total yards against Pittsburgh. Green Bay, the last time we saw them, they looked pretty bad against the Saints. Now, they looked okay in the first half. Saints made some adjustments. Green Bay couldn't run the football, and that was that. But I feel like there is some recency bias here incorporated into this game. And to be completely honest with you, Joe, and for our listeners out there, the only way I would look in this game is to take Green Bay. Now, I'm sure there are going to be some people that will want to tease Green Bay up to 8.5 and maybe do a tease on the total, probably try to take the total, up into the 49.5 range and then come back on the under. And I certainly can't blame anybody for that if you want some action here on this game. But like you said, I think you brought up a really interesting point here in that, Green Bay may run a little bit more I formation, may run a little bit more of a power backfield. And we don't see that in the NFL anymore. I mean, very few teams still incorporate I formation on a significant percentage of their plays. That's something that if Green Bay can do it, and with a healthier offensive line now, with some of their tackles back and some of the other guys a little bit healthier, that could be a big X factor in this game because you don't see teams kind of line up and run it between the tackles anymore. I'm not sure how equipped Detroit is for that because, like I said, you just don't see that very often.
Well, they got the personnel to do it. Ripkowski is a very capable fullback, and although Martellus Bennett probably not going to play, and they have plenty of tight ends that have been in this system. Richard Rodgers knows the system. Lance Kendricks is going to be fine catching passes, and these guys can get it done. I really think Aaron Jones, we've seen some real flashes of greatness from him, and I know that's getting out there for an undrafted player out of UTEP, but he really has shown. I think he's really kind of taking control of this backfield. They are healthy up front finally. Like I said, those two tackles coming back, that's the difference maker. And this has been I think, like the recency bias you mentioned, it's not just lack of respect for Hundley and maybe what the Packers can do. They are starting to buy into the Detroit Lions defense. You know, Terrell Austin's done a good job. Ezekiel Hunt's a little banged up here, but that's where I think they're missing the boat in some respects. That at corner, I don't think they're locked up, and I guess I'll just label it. I'm a Jared Davis hater. The guy, I really don't think he runs well with backers, with tight ends rather, and running backs. So I think that's where they have the advantage. And yeah, if they just line up best on best, mano a mano, I think the Packers can make the difference in the running game here.
One more thing I want to ask you about here, and as I wrote up the preview for this game, I was kind of looking at this, and it's something I've sort of been thinking about throughout the season with the Detroit Lions, is that, you know, in 2015, when Jim Bob Cooter took over here as the offensive coordinator and he was a midseason replacement, all of a sudden Matthew Stafford took off, and he played exceptional football in the second half of that season. Last year, a solid campaign, 65.3% completion percentage, was the second best of his career. Second best adjusted net yards per pass attempt as well. But then there's this year, where Stafford's only completed 60.4% of his throws. That's about what he had in 2014. Less than 6 adjusted net yards per pass attempt. That's a mark that he hasn't had since 2012. And that was a 4-12 Rams team that year. Is Stafford regressing with Jim Bob Cooter? Is this a thing where he just doesn't have the wide receiver talent? Are teams game planning better? What do you think the situation is here with Stafford in this offense?
Well, Stafford's playing hurt, definitely with the last few games at least, and then I think their plans really got a monkey wrench thrown right into the situation with Taylor Decker, who they acquired, or Taylor Decker going on PUP rather. I think that hurt their plans at left tackle, and they've gotten all they can out of Greg Robinson, but in this game, that's going to be another issue where they're at on the blind side of Stafford. So I'd say the line's a bit of a culprit, which is a shame because, you know, they brought in T.J. Lang and Rick Wagner as the players I thought about that they tried to address it in the offseason. But, yeah, the Decker injury, they're really dying to get him back into the lineup because that left side with Graham Glasgow, that's been the problem for them. Not only Stafford playing hurt, I don't know if I'm going to throw it on JBC there. I think it's just a little circumstantial here, and really, I still believe in Stafford. Whatever he's playing through, not only is it holding him back, but were this not a quarterback that has experience playing through pain and a tough SOB, he might be out of the lineup. So I see a guy in Stafford that's he's just, you know, overcoming his threshold, doing what he's got to do to keep his job, and people that want to criticize him for being overpaid and, you know, why should he be the highest paid quarterback? It's just, number one, the cost of doing business, and number two, who are you going to get that's really going to put in more effort than Matty? I've loved this kid since he came out, and, you know, still, as player comparisons in some of my reports, like, if you get a comparison to Matt Stafford, I think extremely high of you.
Well, I mean, that's just what I was wondering is, you know, is this a Stafford thing? I mean, we know that quarterbacks all age differently, and, of course, we have some guys in the NFL over the last few years who have been very good into their late 30s, and then, of course, after they hit that 40 marker, Stafford only turns 30 next year. So that's kind of what I was wondering is, you know, is this more about the group around him, or is this more about Stafford himself? And I think you kind of answered that a little bit. And it's not I mean, obviously there's still a lot of football left to be played this year, but you always want to keep something in the back of your mind for upcoming seasons. And Joe, it sounds like in your estimation, if Detroit can surround him with some more depth on the offensive line and maybe get him somebody aside from Golden Tate that can actually catch the football, you know, maybe we're looking at a Stafford bounce back season next year.
I have to think so, and really this is a lot of it too is not just the offensive coordinator here. There's a really good staff, and just Terrell Austin on the DC side. They got Al Golden as the tight ends coach, so not only is that helping the tight ends, it's helping the O-line. Stafford, like you mentioned, the age. If they could get that line figured out, Kenny Golladay will not play tonight. I think it is a developing stud, and eventually they're going to get Eric Ebron out of there and get a more than serviceable tight end. Hopefully it works out with Michael Roberts, but I like the makeup of this roster, and going forward, I'm fine with getting some Detroit Lions stock because I believe in what's on the field, the product there, good trigger man, and a defense that's playing pretty well.
All right, well, we'll get to the week in review section here. We'll start with the first game that was on the board on Sunday. That was game 451-452 between Philadelphia and Denver. Denver, very popular pick in the betting market. Number came down from 8.5 to 7. Very popular pick in the Super Contest as well. My only loss in the Super Contest this weekend was Denver, but unfortunately going 4-1 with a bunch of consensus plays isn't exactly an optimal outcome. But in any event, this was a 31-9 game at half. Philadelphia wins 51-23 going away here in this one. And maybe all of us should have seen this coming. Brock Osweiler played terrible. The Broncos are playing their third straight road game. Maybe this is one where, a lot of us should have seen it differently. On the other hand, I keep looking for reasons to go against the Philadelphia Eagles because up until this point, statistically, they haven't really supported being a 7-1 team. But here in this one, very efficient offensively. Ajayi with a rushing touchdown. Carson Wentz, 4 of his 15 completions went for 6. Maybe it is time that we just come to accept the fact that the Eagles are really, really good.
I'm finally there. And like you, I wanted to doubt them. Heading into up against a good defense, well, I guess the smartest thing I did was stay away from the game because I really wanted to take the Broncos. And, the Eagles, there is no better way to go into a bye week. I should also include here than to spank a team and take a week off. Enjoy your vacation, Carson Wentz. Another guy, just a big, hairy American winning machine. That trade they made for Ajayi looks like it paid off in spades. They will eventually miss Jason Peters. Vaitai looked more than serviceable out there, but once that's one game sample size, let's see what happens against Dallas. These receivers are really playing well. Alshon Jeffrey seems like he's finally starting to click in the offense. They're definitely force feeding the ball to him, and I think that's just a result of Zach Ertz being out. But this isn't just a trash team they beat up on. This at one point was a great Denver defense, and it just doesn't seem to matter who they put. Everything Doug Peterson and Frank Reich or who it exactly is dialing it up, I'm guessing Peterson, everything they call works. It's just they're imposing their will, and the defense is also loaded. With a guy like Fletcher Cox up front, that's a player you got a game plan around. You just have no choice. The secondary is getting healthy. I'm not in love with them, but it's Jimmy Shorts, the combination of his defense, the points they're scoring, the X factor at quarterback. We always love to fall back on solid coaching. Well, Shorts fielding a quality defense, you can count on that week in and week out. And with these horses, they're going to be tough to beat from a defensive perspective. And anyone wants to watch that game again, Vinny Curry playing really well. The rookie Derek Barnett getting thrown into the mix. Should mention that, that whole defensive end group, that they really have an embarrassment of riches up there. And they've got, like I said, the Cowboys, right after the bye, week 13, Seattle should also be interesting. But, as you mentioned, looking for reasons to maybe doubt Philly, I'm just going to start backing them, and I'm definitely not stepping in front of them. They're playing too well. They're loaded, and, the world's kind of their oyster at this point. I know that one of the favorite words of this podcast is regression. It's like they're almost playing too well. They just can't keep up with this higher rate, but in general, they're just going to go far with a QB like Wentz running the show. It's just impressive to see, and I guess that's the only reason I wanted to bring them up, Adam, because like you, I'm tired of doubting them, and I'm just going to either back them or just kindly step away.
No, I completely agree with you, and that is one of the things that's really hard for me is that, and people that listen back to the Bettor's Box know that, what I like to do in a lot of cases when I can is to use statistics to my advantage and look for opportunities to isolate teams or individuals that are in line for regression. And the Eagles looked like that team. 2 weeks ago, this is a team that was 6-1 and just plus 0.3 yards per play. And you look at something like that, you say, okay, well, maybe their turnover margin's ridiculous. It wasn't. They're only +6 in turnover margin. But they're finding ways to win football games. They're beating teams efficiently. And at some point, you just have to look at it and say, okay, you know what? Maybe this isn't going to play out the way that I thought it would. I mean, this is a team that hung 51 on Denver without Zach Ertz, who's Carson Wentz's favorite target. I understand that scoring 51 against Denver is going to get a lot of respect. It's going to get a lot of attention. But to do it without Zach Ertz shows me how much Carson Wentz has grown up. Shows me that he's able to look through his progressions. Also shows me that the offensive line is giving him time to do that, which is obviously helpful. But the fact that, you get so many mismatches in today's NFL using the tight end because linebackers just can't cover tight ends anymore. Safeties are worried about help over the top or worried about this or worried about that. Tight ends have become such an enormous mismatch in the NFL. To not have one of the best ones in the league in Zach Ertz and go out there and put up 51 on a Denver defense that was allowing 4.5 yards per play this year, that's an eye-opener. That's something very significant. Now, of course, the flip side of this coin is that when the Eagles play at Dallas here on Sunday Night Football on the 19th, play the Bears on the 26th, you're going to be paying a premium on their numbers. So maybe it's not the best time to back them, but I'm certainly done going against them. I mean, this is a team that hasn't had more than one turnover in a game since week 2. They don't beat themselves. And we talked about at the top of the segment here about, there's a lot of teams in the middle of the pack. There's just not that elite team that's out there. You have to find teams that don't beat themselves. The Eagles don't beat themselves. Too many teams make too many screw-ups, and then that's why they have 5-3 records or 4-4 records or whatever else. If you take care of the football, if you're able to move it the way that Philadelphia is, you're going to win a lot of games. And it's sad that it took a 51-23 beatdown of a good defense for me to figure that out, but consider it found out.
And it is tough, but you got to respect them. That one thing I do have to address too, they've got vets in the right places, but they've also got a lot of youth buying into the scheme. And yeah, I could have said it better. Without Zach Ertz, that chess piece of theirs on offense, it just speaks to the cohesion they've got going and what they're, like I said, they're drinking the Kool-Aid. Everything Peterson's putting out there, everything Reich's teaching them, they're sponging it up, and it's just a good thing to see. And yeah, I have to say it again. Coverage linebackers in the NFL is an epidemic. People want to complain about offensive line and poor play, and some of these college products are just not ready. That may well be the case, but there's a reason why guys like Alec Ogletree, Thomas Davis for the Panthers, Mark Barron, also for the Rams, are playing linebacker now. They're former safeties, and they can actually run, unlike some of these guys that get drafted for no apparent reason. It's like some of these teams haven't even seen the Florida film from Jarrett Davis. And sorry if Jarrett Davis is listening, but geez, oh, Pete, man. I just think that's another round peg, square slot, and the Lions are just praying it works out. And anyways, I'll get off my high horse there.
No, it's all good. It's not a bad thing to touch on a team that's 8-1 because, one of the things that you're going to find in the betting market, and of course you saw this last week, is you saw a lot of investment on the Denver Broncos because you just don't see this. You think of New England being really great. You think of Green Bay when Aaron Rodgers is around being very great. Seattle when they were in their heyday and their run. You don't really want to put Philadelphia in that category yet. So when they are a 7-1 team, the public's going, okay, this is a really good team. And the sharp guys are going, okay, this can't continue. And then you get a game like this, and all of a sudden, I'm not to say that I'm the sharpest guy in the world because I'm certainly not, but I'll be really curious to see what happens when they come off the bye because bye week teams have been steamed over and over and over again this year. Do they get steamed for that Dallas game? Is Ezekiel Elliott, suspended by that point? I don't know what's going to be happening 2 weeks from now, but what I do know is that you're probably going to have some sharp guys now that will look at this and say, okay, they're probably not an 8-1 team because nobody's an 8-1 team from a statistical standpoint this year, but they're not going to actively go against them. And I think that in and of itself is a sign of respect for what the Eagles have done this year.
Well, most definitely.
All right, well, let's talk about the San Francisco 49ers. We'll talk about a team that's on the complete opposite end of the spectrum here. And Jaquiski Tartt goes down for them with a season-ending injury. And things just have kind of gone from bad to worse here for this team. And, the schedule has not done them any favors at all. They've had a bunch of road games on the East Coast with early kickoffs. They've had some other difficult travel spots. Went to Seattle, then hosted the Rams on a short week. So they've had a pretty tough go of it here in terms of how the schedule's worked out for them. They will have their bye in Week 11, but they have to play the New York Giants here this week. And, Joe, Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be the guy. It's a matter of how long it takes to get to that point. But I don't know what San Francisco can do here this week against the Giants team that is in a similarly bad shape.
Well, I don't expect them to be competitive anytime soon. I mean, it's just a bad situation. And one thing I just have to address is that was a huge move they made. No matter how bad it gets this year, that was just a creative maneuvering chip in deals, future, current. I know a lot of people probably had a raised eyebrow when they heard Garoppolo wasn't going to start, and I just look at it as smart business. That they're just few franchises are actually willing to be honest with themselves of where they're at, and they don't have left tackle Joe Staley in there. The offensive line is really in shambles, and that's probably being nice. I mean, right now, you just can't put a guy out there who hasn't practiced. So I think that needs to be addressed. But just developmentally, workshopping, Jimmy being integrated into Kyle's West Coast team, they're going to do a little bit different things than what they did in New England. Josh McDaniels, a lot of option routes and situational routes, adapting to Kyle's West Coast. I mean, it shouldn't take a terrible amount of time, but he's going to be in there within a few weeks. I wouldn't say it'd take longer than another week, really. But I just think, too, if they want to wait, I'm not going to hold it against them. This is a dumpster diver, and you have to look at the future. If you're going to have a high pick, you've already got Jimmy to a long-term deal. They could trade that pick away to a QB-needy team and continue to build their arsenal of draft picks. I think that move in itself told you a lot what the 49ers not only believe of their current team, where they're going this year, and also what they think of next year's QB draft class. I think they don't make that deal unless they don't really have a guy picked out, because they're staring at the number one pick, battling with Cleveland. I mean, I don't see them winning a lot of games going forward, so they're still top one, top five. They have plenty of picks. They could go get any of these rookies that they like, and this deal, that shows they're not interested. They want to get someone that I guess Kyle worked out Jimmy out of Eastern Illinois when he was with Cleveland, I believe, as the OC. So he's got a little relationship. Definitely like what he saw, but I just think it's a business move. It hurts for this season, and yeah, as you mentioned, you don't know what they're going to do against the Giants, and I've got to agree. I can't expect much after the bye. Seattle, just some teams that might just walk all over them, and they might just be fine with that. So that's what I'd be afraid of, having a 49ers ticket going forward. Is not that they're going to tank by any means. Hate to use that word, but it's just so hard to believe they'll be competitive in any of these games, and a team that's just staring right through the window at 2018. And another thing to think about here, how much this potentially hurts New England in the future. I mean, they loved Garoppolo. There is no doubting that, especially look at Belichick's press conference day of. I mean, he's just kind of shell-shocked at what happened and how it went down, but it just came to push to shove, and the trade deadline's here, and they basically, another franchise is being honest with themselves and said, do you want a compensatory third, or do you want a really high second rounder? Because it's either or at this point. You make it through the season, you got to deal Garoppolo. You don't have a choice, and where they're going in the future without Tom Brady. So I don't know how much this helps listeners in the present tense, other than the 49ers are pretty much toxic, in my opinion. Even unless Garoppolo really just shows some amazing flashes, this is a team, I think, staring right at 2018. A lot of the players are going to start to feel it. Dogs outside the stadium can smell it. And, I'd be avoiding 49ers, but also, making your cheat sheet for next year, little notes you like to take and revisit months after. Jimmy Garoppolo in the second year of Kyle Shanahan's offense is not going to be a bad look. So just, keep tabs on him next season, I guess, is what I'd really like to stress.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have to talk up Kyle Shanahan. I've done that several times over here on the show, whether it's with regards to the 49ers or in regards to Atlanta and the offensive problems that the Falcons have had this year. But if Kyle Shanahan isolates a guy that he wants with how intelligent he is offensively, with what he knows he can draw up from a play design standpoint, you go and you get that guy. Because you brought Kyle Shanahan to San Francisco for one reason, and that was to fix this team's offense. And if he thinks Jimmy Garoppolo is the guy over any of the first-round quarterbacks that are out there, or even second-round quarterbacks that are out there, you got to do it. And so they did it, and kudos to them for that. And I agree. I mean, I think you let C.J. Beathard kind of get his ass kicked a little bit next week by the Giants defense, if the Giants actually come out west looking to play, which who knows if that'll be a possibility. But I think you go to Garoppolo in that game against Seattle after the bye week, because he's got that time to sit down with Shanahan. He'll have, 2 3/4 weeks basically to go through the playbook. He'll have time to figure everything out. And Kyle Shanahan's a smart guy. He'll do whatever he can in terms of protections to keep Garoppolo upright. But then you get 6 games. You get a pretty decent sample size to look at Garoppolo and not even evaluate his play, but evaluate what you have around him. Who can he work with? Can he work with Marquise Goodwin? Obviously we won't know about Pierre Garçon because he's hurt. Is that relationship there with George Kittle? Is that relationship there with Trent Taylor? Do you need to go out there and find somebody else that can catch some balls for you? Do you have to spend that first-round pick on a wide receiver? Do you trade down, pick up a wide receiver at that point, plus another second or a third or a fourth or something like that? So I think that's ultimately what you do here if you're San Francisco, is you find out what he has to work with in terms of his skill set and then build around him like a lot of franchises do with their quarterbacks. So I think if you give him 6 games, I think it's a good sample size. You're coming out of a bye. You're playing a Bears team that has a good defense, so he's going to get tested there. A Texans team that could be a confidence builder in Week 14. Titans don't have a great secondary. Jacksonville's obviously the game I'd worried about because he's probably going to get hit a few times there. Rams, who knows what they're playing for in Week 17. So you get a good mix of teams that are still in the hunt, teams that are building things, teams that may not be in the hunt. I think that's a really good sample set there for Garoppolo. And that's the way that I would do it with San Francisco. And, what that means here for this week against the Giants, where they're up to a 2-point favorite now, I don't necessarily know. But like you said, as far as looking ahead toward next season, Garoppolo is going to be there. It's just a matter of what's actually around him.
Yeah, I think you probably nailed it there, is that this is going to be your lab experiment right now. You're looking for who's establishing chemistry, who's adapting quickly to Jimmy, and then also it's just, like I mentioned, the business part of it, they're also moving ahead of these other teams that need quarterbacks. Cleveland, the Dolphins, Cardinals, Jets, maybe even the Giants. They're now a step ahead of them in the whole offseason game as well as the draft game. And like you said, they can just put Jimmy out there, see what they've got, kind of establish just where they need to go and in what direction before the offseason even gets going. So, yeah, it's a team you got to like going forward. But, yeah, it'll just be interesting to see what they're going to put on the field. And yeah, I think half the league's got to be really curious of what Garoppolo is going to look like, especially when so many teams inquired not only this offseason, before the deadline, and people were knocking on the Patriots' door for this kid. So Kyle Shanahan is definitely not the only fan of Jimmy Garoppolo.
Carl, I know that one team that you wanted to touch on here during our Week in Review segment is the Seattle Seahawks. So they lost 17-14 to the Washington Redskins. Kind of a strange game overall. It was interesting the way that this one played out, but despite the losing effort here, where Seattle only had 2 points through 3 quarters, you were fairly impressed with Seattle's performance in this one.
I just still think this is a good team, and if you're a Seattle backer, which I'm about to be for the next 3 weeks, I'm not sure. No, they're not perfect. Yes, they have flaws, and this was a horrible game. I'll have to admit there's just some stressors I want to stress that well, first off, this is still a one-game sample size, and it's almost like you have to say this for every game, but this is the NFL, and things happen in a singular vacuum. So there's a lot of problems here that I think are fixable. There was an issue with the red zone offense, and, yeah, they definitely have to get their running game together. But kicker, I think they'll audition some new legs this week. Blair Walsh, a thing of the past. They get that figured out. This is in the win column, but I think they just ran into a solid defense. We've talked about the Redskins on this show before, like a team we're looking to back, and Greg Minuski shout out to him because he's doing a great job scheming. Ryan Kerrigan, Ryan Kerrigan, the pride of Muncie, Indiana, has just been impossible to block in some of these games that I've seen him. So that makes me smile ear to ear. The real given name is Patrick for anybody curious. But the Redskins, I think, they played one hell of a game, and what a catch by Josh Doxson. They just kept coming back, and I think what really killed Seattle, 16 penalties for 138 yards. While I'm watching this game, there's holds, special teams penalties, even on defense. Dwayne Brown struggled, false start. Justin Brisk, he needs to get his act together, and I think O'Day Abushi got a couple holds on him. So this whole offensive line's definitely got to get some cohesion, and the Legion of Boom's not the same without Earl Thomas. That's definitely a huge takeaway from the game. It's like they were still good, but when they have Earl Thomas, they're great. So I'm just looking at a team. They've got an all-pro at quarterback. There's speed at receiver. Tom Cable is going to coach up that offensive line. Dwayne Brown, getting him, and that's another trade at the deadline that I'm glad to have an opportunity to speak on because that fits. He was drafted by Kubiak for Houston to run that zone block scheme, and that's what they're doing in Seattle. There's a great offensive line coach there, as I mentioned. I think this is a really solid fit. He was obviously, big-time situation that he hated in Houston, but outside of that, I think they're really getting not a great player, but a player that's still more than capable and clearly upgrades that line. Bobby Wagner playing out of his mind as well. That the game he played, that should go in his highlight reel. That kid is just really on top of his game. Once they get Earl Thomas back in this lineup, this is a great defensive line. I see so much quality on this team, and it was just one bad game, a ton of penalties, the chemistry just not dead right on the offensive line yet. I know it's going to get there, and I'm hoping to get a little value after this loss. I mean, they're up against Arizona, Atlanta, Monday night, San Francisco, next 3 games. These are teams I think they're definitely beatable, and the Seahawks, once they get their act together, that's a team another team I would hate to step in front of just because they're capable of rolling the opposition if everything's right. Once again, they just got caught, and I think Greg Minuski, the Colts have got to feel dumb letting him go and making him into a scapegoat because all he's done at Washington is just improve him, and that Washington coaching staff, that's another, just go ahead and check out their staff page. You're going to see some future head coaches in there, I believe. Jay Gruden's got a good group there, and Seattle just, bad situation. The kicker got stressed a little bit. 3 of those, I think they were all wide left. So I don't want to put this on Blair Walsh. I want to put it on the penalties, but I do want to put it out there for folks. This is a quality roster, well-coached team. I don't have any doubts about the Seahawks, and I'm jumping on that big green 12-man wagon.
Yeah, in Seattle, it's unfortunate that this game comes on Thursday night because it makes it a little bit more challenging of a handicap. I get why it's come down from 6.5 into the 5.5 range at some books. It's 6 minus 0.5 at DSI, but Seattle's a team I would want to back off that performance because 16 penalties isn't going to happen again. They still had 5.8 yards per play, so they moved the football on Washington. They just didn't make kicks. And, of course, that number saw Seattle get steamed up into the 8 range, some books even showing 9. So I'll be curious to see what happens with this game here on Thursday night and see if it is one that I do wind up being interested in. But, Joe, one of the big stories out of the NFL here on Sunday was we had some fisticuffs. We had Jalen Ramsey and A.J. Green going at it. We had, Mike Evans, Barry Marshawn Lattimore from behind. I don't know why that wasn't an ejection, but, I guess referees see what they want to see when it comes to the NFL. But I know that's something that you wanted to touch on a little bit.
Well, I think that situation in particular, the refs losing control of some of these games and some of these incidents. Now, to A.J. Green, I've just got to personally apologize. That's a guy I would stand by. I mean, he's never done this. He's a veteran. Not even through college you see him do stuff like this. And ejecting him was the right thing to do, but ejecting Jalen Ramsey, I think he's got a legitimate complaint there. The Jags do, and he may have started the situation with some words, but not only should have been ejected, but Jameis Winston should be fined for instigating that whole thing. You're injured on the sidelines, not supposed to be playing. You get on the field and punk a guy behind his head. It's just, there's no excuse for some of this. In the other fight, the Cardinals, I think that was the one, they handled that as best they could, but that really could have turned on to a full-on Gunnybrook. I mean, it's just some of these faux fighters that really get me perturbed. Frosty Rucker should not only be fined, he's another guy. I'm expecting a suspension. He went out of his way to get Carlos Hyde in a group of guys. You're real tough going after a guy you outweigh by 60 pounds. And, of course, in this whole melee, nobody's touching Trent Williams, the right tackle from San Francisco, because he weighs about 350, 360. And, yeah, you rewatch that. Nobody wanted a piece of my man Trent. Credit to him for doing the best to kind of separate people. No one wanted a piece of him. He started moving bodies. It's actually some of the best blocking I've seen him do, just because it was a real actual fight. But, yeah, I really hate what Frosty Rucker did. I'm ashamed of what my man A.J. Green did, and I think he's going to be suspended. Rucker's going to be suspended. And if Mike Evans doesn't get some kind of fine or suspension, a blindside shot after the whistle, that's just punk-made coward stuff. You want to fight? Be a man. Call out your beef face-to-face. Go do what you got to do. But behind Lattimore's back, just because you've been getting beat all game, that's a definite punk move. And in general, some of these players, you're not really going to a fight. I mean, I love the violence aspect of it, but we're all wearing helmets, man. Who are you going to punch with a helmet on, A.J. Green? You're just going to break a wrist. And it's just a bunch of kids running around, I got disrespected. Well, you know what? The respect's in the number in that win column, and nothing else matters. Nobody else remembers anything else about you other than what was in that column. And, yeah, I see a bunch of me guys out there starting all these fights, and I didn't see any Patriots in a fight. Those are a bunch of guys worried about that W column. And I don't know, man. The only thing you can explain it, Adam, that these guys must have really enjoyed that UFC card pay-per-view Saturday night.
That must be it, because there were some similarities between that and that UFC card. One final point that I know you wanted to talk about here as the Browns moved to 0-9 by losing to the bye week last week is that you wanted to touch on some teams that are going into the tank, some teams that are kind of looking ahead to the NFL draft a little bit. We've got the two winless teams in Cleveland and San Francisco. The Giants had a deplorable effort against the Rams. They gave up 51 points coming out of the bye week, which is just embarrassing for that entire franchise, and including Steve Spagnuolo and that defense. So what is it specifically that you wanted to touch on a little bit here in terms of that point?
Touching on what I started the segment with, some bad footballs out there. Teams not only in the tank, but, I just don't want to, people shouldn't get it twisted. Yes, the Eagles scored 50. It's great. The Rams offense scoring 50. They're doing well. The Saints look dominant. There's some real bad teams there, and I've got to apologize for two of them. Tampa Bay has done, and I was dead wrong. You could listen to, I believe it was just last week. I'm like, hey, they're not that far off. They can respond. Their backs are against the wall. Jameis, he is not only hurt, it's just obvious look of defeat that I touched on. Dirk Cotter's face during that game tells you everything you need to know about the Bucs. And another team I thought they had a chance to respond was the Giants, just because we're all human beings that don't like getting kicked in the face repeatedly. But Ben McAdoo, man, it's just he must enjoy beatdowns. It's not the play calling. The suspension of Janoris Jenkins hurts, but it's a team thing. It's an infection. It's a virus. And, yeah, especially not Jenkins on the field, that does hurt. But what we saw yesterday, yeah, that's a sick team. And the last one, Denver, getting that many points scored on was just a travesty for that team. And say what you want about Brock, Trevor Siemian, this defense is just better than that. That's just you can't have that happen. So you have to worry about what's going on with Vance Joseph. Even he's questioning in the press conference the effort that was out there. And the Broncos just got beat by a better team. You can admit that, but getting beat like that's a lasting type of loss that's just going to shock their confidence. And I guess, knew the Broncos were going to struggle, but the Giants and the Buccaneers just face planting like that, and just, like I mentioned, pretty gnarly football out there. The Bengals just looking atrocious. My Colts, they're capable of some real terrible play. I hate to put the Browns and 49ers out there, but there's some real doormats this year and some coaches that I guess it's obvious they're at the end of their rope. Ben McAdoo, Cotter, Pagano, they all have the same look of malaise painted on their face, and it's just, it's frustrating to watch. And like I don't want to pin this on the injuries, but boy, this has been a rough season. And last Sunday's 11 games, or 10 rather, that was that was rough to get through Sunday.
Yeah, it really was. And, of course, we'll have to see what happens in the betting market where favorites have already had 2 straight really solid weeks, and that may, continue being a thing here as we keep going forward, because I think that we're starting to see who's really good, who's really bad, and I think you can find edges on some of those teams in the middle here, because there are some teams that just have played a little bit better than their records have shown, and, of course, they're going to run into some teams at some very favorable times here as you go throughout the rest of the season. But Joe Everett from NFL Draft Bible, what's going on over there at the Bible right now?
Well, we've got the 2020 Vision Series out again, every position forward and look ahead to the year 2020, what will it look like, including rookies, what you're expecting to see. We're also ramping up our daily Scouting Report series, starting 2 reports a day in December, and our game previews on the weekly podcast. We're having those on Fridays, and conference calls all this week for the College Gridiron Showcase, bringing you the names you need to know in college football and beyond. So, you can check it all out at NFLDraftBible.com.
And you can follow Joe on Twitter at Joe W. Everett. Joe, thank you so much for your time, man. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next week, bud.
All right, looking forward to it, Adam.